The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we are joined by a very special guest, Jason McKenzie from Team XPZ, one of the head honchos up in there. Very huge team in the West Coast of the United States. He's off of a fresh victory with Tau at the Smite Club Open. And it's not the Tau that you've heard of and thought of when you think of Tau. This is Retaliation Cadre. It's deep striking, it's moving, it's doing all kinds of really exciting stuff for you. Jason, up and comer on the scene, crushing major tournaments. We're going to figure out exactly how it works, who he is, get to know him, get to know his army, and put this army on the map. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I've been listening to you guys for a long time. I've been playing 40K for a long time. I've seen you at every LVO I've ever gone to, even in 6th, 7th, and 8th edition back in the days. So it's a pleasure to be on here and interacting with you.
Oh, well, I'm really excited to have you. You've definitely earned the spot, and I get the pleasure of coaching your team in the upcoming Champions Cup. So I'm very excited for that experience as well.
We're happy to have you, man. I told you, you're going to get the full Xenos petting zoo experience, and you're going to have a great time.
I'm here to pet those Xenos creatures. Awesome. So this is part one of a two-part show, everybody. In part one, we're going to get to know Jason, his army, his play style, and of course how it all works. And in part two, that's going to be for our patrons. You can subscribe on AOW40K.com. That's our Patreon. It's $5 a month to get you access to this part two, along with 250 plus other part twos and our Discord server. We're going to be talking about the games, the actual moves he made, the tactical minutia. If you want to learn exactly how this army operates on the table and why you need to be aware of it, check out part two. Jason, let's get this started. Tell me about how you got into Warhammer.
So I got into Warhammer like a lot of people, kind of starry-eyed kid, about 12 years old. So I've been playing for 17 years now. Maybe a little different than most, but in like 6th grade, the new kid on the block had just moved here from London. He was a British kid, and my best friend had made friends with him and eventually kind of integrated into the friend group. And he's like, "Hey guys, I played this cool game called Warhammer. You guys want to go see it?" And his mom picked us up, and we all went to, back when Games Workshop had the battle bunkers. There were like 4 or 5 in the States, and there are these huge game stores that was just 40K and fantasy and all that. And we ended up going in there. They had this whole program called White Shields, and every like last Sunday of the month, it was just for kids between age, call it like 8 and like 17, to privately play with like other kids, so you weren't kind of intimidated by all the other adults in the store. Kind of got kicked off there. We'd go there every Saturday, Sunday. Parents would drop us off, give us $5 for lunch, and say, "All right, we'll see you guys at 8." Right, and that's kind of how I started my 40K journey. Didn't really start.
That's playing. Like exactly how I got into it too. I like started as like a young kid. My parents would drop me off, see you later.
Pretty much. Yeah. My mom used to always joke that if I was spending my chore money on Warhammer, I wasn't doing anything I wasn't supposed to.
That's so true, though. That's so true. It's such a great hobby for a kid to get into.
Exactly. And then I met some guys as I got older, like late high school, and I started playing competitive 40K at the store. I started with Tau, and then I ended up collecting Zinch Demons before they got their total glow up with the new Screamer models and Flamers. So all of a sudden overnight my army became OP, and all of a sudden I was just dominating every event they had there. And that kind of just carried into me being more interested in competitive gameplay. Kind of jumped a team or two and eventually kind of made it to Xenos Petting Zoo with Steven, and I've been in love there ever since. So
wow, that's a really awesome trajectory and pretty wholesome as well. So at some point you were a kid playing Warhammer, just trying to enjoy the game, and you make the transition to a competitive tournament winner. What is that transition like? How did you get so good at the game? Warhammer is such a deep game where there's so many ways to improve at it and not even know where you get started. What was your process?
Yeah, so I would say there was probably four, in my opinion, 4 distinct stages of where most players who kind of hit the trajectory that I'm at. You get into Warhammer, if on the younger side, no one has any idea what the heck you're doing, right? We thought drones had 4 wounds like commanders did, right? And that's just how we played, and then you go have the experience at your game store where the adult in the room says, "Young man, that's definitely not how that works." And your whole world shatters. right?
Dude, this is exactly my childhood.
Like you get like tabled at like on like 1,000 points, and you're like in shock for like a week, and then you're like, oh, that's how that works, right? And I started traveling for RTTs back when FLG was here in Southern California. Reese and Frankie were running events over here, SoCal Open and all that. And kind of 6th and 7th edition. I stopped playing during 7th edition. I'm sure you know why. I just it was getting a little too bloated. I ended up playing Infinity for a couple years. Then when they announced 8th edition, I jumped right back in. Didn't really have a team though. So I was kind of like a real consistent 3-3 player. That kind of pushed its way into like 4-2 territory at like events when I came to like Xeno's Petting Zoo. And one day I kind of sat there and I'm like, I feel like I really got to move on past this stage. What is it going to take to kind of get to that next level of play? And I mean, honestly, it comes with a little bit of personal integrity. How you play, how you treat your opponents is a really big like stepping stone, right? We've all talked about like mid-table tears or like the mid-table mentality where you get your first taste of success and you get real serious. Right. And you kind of got to overcome that to get to the next level. You got to get over yourself. Honestly,
that's such an interesting viewpoint. That's like, I've interviewed people for like 5 years on the show, and I don't think I've ever heard that trajectory before, right? Like you're a mid-table player, you start going to tournaments, and you have that taste of success you caught, and you're so spot on. I coach everybody on this. You have to beat your own ego in the game. Like it's about getting better in the process, not just winning and at all costs and all that kind of stuff. And tournament players sometimes carry that stigma, even though most tournament players are actually very cool and it's not that toxic, but some people do suffer from that. And I'm interested to see like kind of how that impacted you and what you were doing to get through that.
Oh, it extremely impacted me. I mean, I played in most of like 9th edition. I played like Adeptus Mechanicus, as everyone knows, was just completely confusing, right? I mean, there was a point where we joked about it. I had these little tokens for buffs. I had a Rustalker squad that has 16 buffs on it in one turn. And somebody just looked at me and they're like, what are you playing, Jason? Like, what is this? Right? Like, yeah. This is ridiculous. And there was a point where my games were going so fast and I was going quickly, a little too quickly for things that people are like, Jason, you need to like slow down, man. Like, we know you're good. That's great. But like, you need to stop. Like, know what you're doing. And that has evolved into my Tau gameplay I play a very honest game of 40K. I tell you what I want to do. We measure it. If it can be done, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to give you the same kind of treatment, right? If you tell me what you want to do, if you put a model out, and then like, for example, in round 4 of this event, one of my opponents said he put a model out to shoot Dark Lance, forgot to shoot during the shooting phase, but he said he was going to do it. And I'm like, hey man, I know we're like scoring cards right now. Just shoot your Dark Lance, man. Because once you realize that you're going to beat somebody off strategy, not because you gotcha'd them, the game opens up to be a much more enjoyable competitive experience when you kind of give your opponents that grace.
That's a great outlook and one I find super true. Like if you're gotching people as a strategy or not even like on rules, like just holding them accountable to things they intended to do but technically messed up. It's like forgetting to shoot that Dark Lance, great example. That's a way to win a game, but it's not a way to get better at the game. You have won that game and you've moved on to the next round. At a certain point, you're going to hit people who don't mess up that minutia or can play that game even better than you. They can call you out on your shoot like really hard, and it's going to degrade your experience. It's going to make you not liked in the community. It's going to make you not enjoy your hobby, and those people honestly filter out a lot of the time. And ultimately what gets people better, I find, is when they start that transition and they think about, okay, how can I win this game through my choices, my tactics, my strategy? And, I've recognized that if I'm to actually want to beat the better players out there and win tournaments seriously, I can't rely on they didn't know their rules or they messed up like a technical thing. That's not going to carry you very far. You have to actually win on the table.
That's 100% correct. 100% correct. And there's always something you can learn after the game, right? When you have a good game with somebody and it was a close game, you can always ask them, hey, anything you feel maybe could have been better, even when you win, and taking that attitude, because someone you had a good game with is going to be much more receptive to that conversation than somebody you didn't.
Right. So you started kind of getting past this for yourself and really started focusing on the gameplay and how you could get better. What did that look like for you? There's so many elements to the gameplay element.
Honestly, prep work is, in my opinion, the real elevation of difference in getting quality practice in. It's one thing I tell is one of the captains of Xeno's petting zoo is if you're going to go out and get teams practice reps, go make them quality reps. Look. I love taking a new army I haven't played to like the local game store and going whatever 2-1-3-0 with an army I don't know what I'm doing. Like it's people who don't like attend GTs on a regular basis. That's not good quality practice, especially if it's with your main army, your main list. Go play good people on your team, get a specific matchup in, and practice something very specific. TTS is really good for this. This is a little bit ahead, but I'm playing broadsides with the current RCAD list I have, and they're hard to use. They move 5 inches. Sitting down and spending a couple hours on the Games Workshop layouts we play and actually mapping out where I should probably put them will completely elevate your gameplay, because you're going to go into this, if you're practicing for an event, where your models want to go, and you can get as deep as you want on kind of matchups, but you can figure out, well, I'm already prepared. I'm not stuck with analysis paralysis because I already know where some of my models are going. And that kind of prep work in the math of knowing, if I shoot in a cursed unit with X unit in my army, how many am I really killing? And knowing that answer before you're going to execute it is how you can like plan your turn. And to me, that's what the high level like practice takes.
So it's like a lot of preparation and before you actually get to the tournament type of stuff.
Yeah, because anybody can slam as many reps in as you need. But I think if you sit down, your army, where you want to put it, and you're getting like regular enough practice with it, you're going to be very consistent.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and it seems to be very true. Let's talk about how you have transitioned into playing Tau and what that's looked like in 10th edition. I know a lot of players, when the Codex dropped, saw Montka, and of course Callion is largely similar to what it used to be, and those two were the powerhouses from what I could tell, at least from my perspective. And Montka being so turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 lethal hits, advance and shoot, like it's everything a shooting army could want. And you're taking like a totally different approach with Ret Cadre. Was that initially just to like snowflake, I want to be different, or is there like a real strategic reason behind that?
So my first RTT when the Tau book dropped up, I played Montka. And I just was not feeling it. It didn't have the flexibility that I wanted. I personally play very flexible lists. You could almost even say it's a bit Highlander, the way I build my armies. I typically don't take 3 of the same thing most of the time. It's maybe like in pairs. And then I'll take like one of like 6 to 7 data sheets on top of that, which is represented well in the list I took to Smite Club. I prefer a very balanced gameplay. What I didn't like about Montka and Callion is how much agency it gives your opponent to either slam the gas or pump the brakes. And I was just finding that it didn't fit my play style to jam my gameplay into 3 turns of a 5-turn game.
Yeah, I totally get that. You want to play the full 5 turns. Like trying to just bum rush your opponent with assault, advancing, and shooting models is definitely not for me. It's I can totally respect that side to it. So what did Ret Cadre offer that you found so attractive?
Right, so it has its rules all 5 turns, right? That's obviously the main selling point. But the army rewards aggression in terms of like, I'm going to get, danger close, nice and close to you. I get extra strength. I get AP. I'm rewarded for being aggressive, right? And Montka does the same thing, but with this, I can do it turn 1. I can do it turn 5. I've got a unit that goes up and down turn 1 that I don't do it very often, but if I need to like slam the gas turn 1, I absolutely can. And that's kind of what drew me to it. Uppy downy mechanics are obviously very strong. So having things like Starflare is fantastic just for being able to control the pace of the game. I find that with RCAD, I can control the tempo and I can basically say, well, turn 3 looks like my go turn. So I'm going to plan for it. And then I'm going to like absolutely slam the gas, go 150 miles per hour that turn. Or, hey, I'm going to pull back a little bit. And the stratagem suite and enhancements allow me to do that in this detachment. And battle suits are awesome. So
that's fair, right?
Like, that's like the second half of it, right?
What is Tau if not its battle suits?
Exactly.
I can respect that. That's an old school Tower player mentality. Have you been playing Tau forever?
So that was the first army I picked up when I was young, right? I went and saw the big battle suit in the glass cases, and I was like, well, I mean, that's it. I'm sold. I didn't even know I liked the anime at the time, but Tao told me you're going to. So that's kind of how I got into it. There was a time about 4 or 5 years where I wasn't playing them. They kind of sat on the shelf. And eventually I just AdMech was getting a little too, my brain was hurting a little too much playing them. And the NIDs had just dropped. 9th edition NIDs were absolutely running amok. And I was like, I'm gonna pick my Tau back up, and I'm so glad I did, because I remembered how much I enjoyed playing the kind of speedy guns that have a lot of flexibility. You know what? I always joke with people, I don't screw with the fight phase. Every time I got to roll 2d6, I get butterflies in my stomach. I hate rolling charge rolls, so I just don't charge people.
I can respect that. It's the very Tau player of you, but that is what it is. So, Jason, tell me about this Tau list that you've cooked up with this Rec Cadre stuff.
Yeah, so starting from the top, 3 different characters. I got the commander in the Coldstar battle suit. He's got grenades, so that he's real flexible when I need some mortal wounds in a pinch. The enforcer battle suit is armed with cyclics and missile pods with the up and down and Starflare ignition system. He's great with the fire knives, just because he can be anywhere on the table that I need him. Initially, I didn't feel very comfortable with the missile pods, but once you kind of acknowledge that unit basically is going to shoot for 5 turns out of the game, you kind of can plan for, even if he only does a little bit of damage every turn, you're pretty happy with him. This list is very CP hungry. The ethereal is kind of a must. So the fact that you need 2 CP to deep strike if you want to, right? 1 CP strike and fade, just having an ethereal around. And on top of that, let's say turn 1, right? You get first turn, there's nothing to shoot at. You get, extend battle lines, and behind enemy lines, you redraw and mark for death. It's nice to be able to new orders something every turn. So the extra CP is great.
Nice.
I got 2x2 broadside battle suits with smart missiles, missile drones, and the heavy rail rifles. They're just so good at killing tanks. I had a Skyray and a Hammerhead for a while, but I found that when you fight a lot of things with 4-up invulns, namely demons and even Imperial Guard to a degree, who can get real good saves, -1 damage, and knights were probably the biggest problem. Having access to dev wounds on 8 shots on 2 broadsides is great. Because I'd shoot a hammerhead at something, they roll 4, and then I'd just have a tear drop down my eye and be sad. So fire knife battle suits are great because they operate without support. I got a unit of those, all with missile pods. They shoot at something, get 4 reels to hit, and then they run away, and they're fat and happy, and they're hard to kind of respond to. Star Scythes are armed with flamers, so they drop in, they roast the crap out of elves and anybody who's toughness 3, toughness 4, and then you have to stand there and be like, well, do I move? Do I take the Overwatch? And then you got to decide what your fate is there. Sunforged. So I have every flavor of Crisis Suit. They drop in, they kill tanks, they run away. I love them. Sunforged are fantastic. And something that every Tau player should be taking is a Ghost Keel. In my opinion, if you're not playing without a Ghost Keel, you're doing something wrong. They're just so good. They're so utilitarian in every list. They stand there, they hold points, they do sabotage without getting shot. They do it all. I love Ghost Keels. Crude Sticky is just good for if you go first turn, stick your objectives, right? Go stand in the middle, go sticky something. It's just so useful to have. Well, I do have a unit of Pathfinders in this army, and I take something that people aren't usually used to, which is the Grav Inhibitor drone. People like to infiltrate with them, but I find in RCAD, I don't want Pathfinders to be in your face. I only have 1 unit, and I've got limited spots, so I tend to just make them -2 to charge, which is almost like pseudo infiltrators against armies like Blood Angels. Basically, oh cool, you want to deep strike in my zone and get on my objective? That's an 11 to charge, my man. Good luck with that. And 2 Riptides and a Piranha. Riptides do Riptide things. They're tough. They stand in the middle. 2 up, 4 up. And anything with a 4-up invul is you always got to over allocate into it, and they just do a lot of damage, right? You pop off with dev wounds, you cheer a little bit, And the mandatory 3x3 stealth suits, you get the extra spotting support. In my opinion, if everybody was running triple tetras before this, everyone just switched to triple stealth suit. The spots are just so good with real ones to hit, real ones to wound. So every time you're activating them, they're always getting a whole lot of value. And I have one unit of Vespids just because they're so flexible. They can go up in the air turn one. They can deep strike. They block rapid ingresses real well. They kind of do it all, and it was either that or a Piranha, and I ended up taking the Vespids just for the flexibility of them. Like I said, sometimes I like taking one or two units just of a data sheet just because they offer a very unique flexibility to the army, and that's what the Vespid pick is for.
I heard flexibility in that description of a list more times than I think I've heard ever before doing this. It's clear you value flexibility so high, and it's like you said this was kind of like a Highlander, meaning like you take one of every data sheet. It's not quite so literal in that you have 3 stealths, 2 riptides, whatever, but it does feel like you've got a lot of different tools, and like there's a purpose behind every unit. How did you come up with such an eclectic army list for what you're doing? Is this trial and error and just rep after rep after rep, or like how did you do this?
Yeah, so my team would call this they call them McKenzie lists. I take whatever is so this is now twice the evolution of my teammate Alex Spatho. We've both gone to the same RTTs, the same one that I played that Moncog rep at, and he goes, Jason, this isn't your army, dude. Like you need to go play RCAD, right? And he sends me this list, and I am like, all right, fine. I relented on it. I played it, and it felt great. And I changed like 700 points of it to fit how I play, which is that, my overused word flexibility. And that's how I ended up coming along to this. This is probably like version 3 of this list. I was running like more suits and less suits. I was running 2 tanks, the Hammerhead and the Skyray. And eventually at some point I was kind of sick and tired of the volume of shooting at 4 Binvals and having nothing to show for it. And I also played a rep into GSC where I just didn't have the volume to maintain like a solid game plan going into GSC's thing is that if a unit responds like 2 or 3 times, you're just not going to have enough to kill them 3 times. A broadside unit looks at a GSC unit and goes, cool, you can just pick them up now, right? Like they're just dead, especially with SMS and missile pods. So I ended up bringing the broadsides in over a Hammerhead and a Skyray just for the opportunity to roll dev wounds on vehicles and have more volume when I needed it. And they benefit from the army rule, right? A Hammerhead and a Skyray don't. They're great to have, don't get me wrong, but having 4 shots that hit on 3s, wounding on 3s most of the time, that are, with a stealth spot, are the only ones to hit and to wound, they're very reliably just ignoring saves, which the math comes out to like very reliable 7 to 8 damage every time they shoot in the vehicle, which is just, reliability is just good to have, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love the kind of causation you had there. Like one of the big problems with these like super high quality, low quantity shot weapons is that they do just bounce off invuls. They do sometimes just whiff their hit rolls, and having more shots in there really smooths that out. And it helps some matchups where more shots, more better. Could you walk us through some of the rules that like your detachment has and the stratagems that you're making use of so we can really get the full picture of your army?
Yeah, so the Detachment Ability is Bonded Heroes. So when you're within 12, you get +1 strength to all of your weapons if you're a battle suit. And if you're within 6, you also get +1 AP. So like I said, you're rewarded for being aggressive. Having +1 strength, +1 AP is super important. There's some very specific breakpoints that matter in almost every game. Missile pods, I have an absurd amount of, I think this army puts out 40 missile pod shots a turn. It's a lot. Strength 7, AP 1, 2 damage. Pretty unassuming profile. Until all of a sudden you're within 6 inches and you're strength 8, AP 2, and they're going, wait, how many shots did you say you had? And then you can strike fear in their eyes. And so with that, there's a couple stratagems that blend really well with that kind of combination of rules. There's Torchstar Gambit for 1 CP. You can shoot, you can move after you shoot. The big important thing with this is you can do it at basically any point in the phase as long as that unit has shot that turn. So, for example, I can resolve my entire shooting phase and then say, you know what? I think I need to go stand on this objective. I killed a little bit more than I thought. I can go pick my, Riptide, and then it shot this phase. It's been resolved. I can now make another normal move. Or, well, I didn't kill as much as I thought. I had my Enforcer unit shot, didn't kill enough. I'm going to have them run behind terrain, and now you can't respond to them. So it's very flexible. The most unassuming one that people, I think, don't realize exists, just because it's the effect of the stratagem is not something you usually see, right? People pay 1 CP for like sustained hits, all the time, but it's usually, you pay 1 CP, get sustained hits, whatever. This Archon protocol, it's 1 command point. If you're a unit of 6 or more, the enemy you're shooting at, you get sustained 1. More importantly, if the unit's 11 or more, you get sustained 2. Now, on paper, it seems, okay, I'm never going to get sustained 2, until you realize how many armies run 10-mans with an attached character. And all of a sudden, this stratagem absolutely blasts the door open on certain matchups. So that's a really big one. For example, a Khorne Berserker unit with a character MOE attached, all of a sudden I get sustained 2 against. And, like an Enforcer Squad that rerolls hits on full strength units, they do a lot of hits. Everybody knows about the 2 CP shortened blade, so 3-inch deep strike. I actually don't use this one a whole lot, maybe once every other game.
Really? I thought this was like a key facet of your army.
So it is. It is a very well-defined tech piece. As I've played more, there's better alternatives to using 2 CP to deep strike within 3. A good example is that stealth suits have an ability called Homing Beacon that allows them to 0 CP rapid ingress. So let's say you've got a stealth team in an aggressive position, and you can deep strike behind a wall with my Sunforged unit, which have the diffusion blasters. It is much better for me to land them for 0 CP behind a building and just roll the advance of a 2 or a 3 to get within melter range, and get all that support and save 2 CP for another unit that wants that 3-inch deep strike. Because there's a lot of things in my army that can 3-inch deep strike and that want to, because they all benefit from it. So by doing that, there's a little bit of flexibility there. But I've always found that more people will screen for the 3-inch deep strike just knowing that you have it.
When you say people screen for the 3-inch deep strike, like some people can do that. Many players in lists cannot even try. But even if they do, it's like at what cost, right? Like, you're screening a 3-inch deep strike effectively is a taxing thing where your units are kind of standing all over the board and basically in the open, right? So it's probably not worth it in most cases, and then you get to capitalize. Or has that not been your experience?
No, that is 100% the case. Now, I can't tell them that before the game starts, right? They'll sit there, they're moving their models, and like, I'm going to go try to screen the 3-inch deep strike, and I'm like, you do that.
Okay. So it's like they think they're being clever. I can get around this, and they just get blown up instead.
Well, yeah. What happens is like you kill like the other 3 units that are in the mid table, and all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm just going to come outside of 9, like over here. I don't even need to 3-inch deep strike. Right. So it's exactly what you said, right? I personally, when I play Warhammer, if you have a 3-inch deep strike, I don't try to screen it. It's just going to happen. I'm not going to try and stop it, because 9 times out of 10, you're just going to do it. You're going to have the CP for it, especially at high level gameplay. It's just going to happen. So just like roll with it. That's my opinion. So there's 3 other stratagems. One of them is definitely on par for the worst stratagem in the game. If you charge me on 1 CP, I roll a D6 for every model in your unit. On a 6, you take a mortal. It's not very good. And then you take a battle shock test. I think I've used it once. They failed the battle shock test and they still made the charge, and I did like 1 mortal, and I was like, great, that was horrible. We're never doing that again. 1 CP stim injectors, you get a feel no pain. It's not as good. It's only on battlesuit units, and it's basically during shooting or fight phase. It's good if you have solid breakpoints. For example, I've fought a lot of sisters kind of in my matchups, and the damage 2, damage 3 on say like a Riptide when they're ready to have like a go turn is just nice to have, because that breakpoint of 2 and 3 damage on 14 wounds with the armor save it has is just really nice. And like, let's say you spike double 6s on a couple rolls, and all of a sudden you've saved 4 wounds and they're out of shooting, and now they're either charging or they're getting themselves in a bad position to try and finish our Riptide off. And the most troll one is, I've only ever used this once in somebody's deployment zone, and it did like 24 mortal wounds, was the failsafe detonator. So you can blow up a battlesuit after it dies. It's 2 CP, so it costs a lot. But you either choose if the roll is a 1 or a 6. I've never chosen the 1, just because I 2 CP to, for a 16% chance of blowing up. I'm not going to hedge my bets like that. But you can blow up a Riptide in somebody's face, and Riptides blow up for D6. So you can do some pretty funny things with this. I've only ever pulled it off once, just because the Riptide had like 1 wound left, and I moved, and then he overwatched the charge, and then I blew up in his face, and he was like, well, maybe I shouldn't have overwatched. But well, you're gonna have a bunch of power fists. Who's gonna die anyway?
Yeah. I love it.
But I mean, the army functions well. I think the stratagem suite is very good.
What's like the base strategy? It seems like you said you're very reactive as a player, and I can appreciate that too as well. But like, how do you walk up to a table? And you even said like you pre-place your models on GW boards on TTS. Like, how do you know what you're gonna do if it's all reactive, or like what is your strategy?
So, like, a general rule of thumb is that I want you to come to me, is what I'm kind of aiming for, right? Because I have access to Torchstar Gambit, where everything moves and shoots. Basically anything in the army, except for basically broadsides and the infantry, can do it. I get to kind of dictate where we're going to play the game, and especially with the existence of ghost kills. A ghost kill says, well, I'm going to go sit on my expansion objective, and well, you either move within 12 or I'm just going to score 8 to 10 points every turn. And that's where you can kind of force out, I don't say I'd call bad decisions, but
they have to do something about it. It's just a forced decision.
Yeah, you have to over allocate, right? And on things like very common events, like right now GW layout 1, well, if you stand behind that terrain over in your deployment zone, I'm sitting 23, 24 inches away. So unless you like advance and charge and you roll that 6, like it's hard to get access to a lone op ghost kill with 2 blanks. So that's usually how I draw things out. If I go first, I'll go sticky an objective in the middle with crude if I have the scout move for it. Otherwise, I'll throw a piranha in the middle and force you to interact with me. And the forced interaction is great because Tau says, cool, well, I'm going to uppy downy my enforcer unit. You're going to respond with some 100-point unit that has to go kill X thing. And then I'm going to say, well, this enforcer brick is just going to kill you on your response. And I run behind terrain, and then we rinse and repeat. And then you realize, oh, I haven't actually achieved anything this turn because Jason's still on an objective and I'm not. So that's how I approach every turn as like a margin of like 5 to 10 points. And so over a 5-turn game, I'm trying to get into like a 20-point lead generally. This army does, in my opinion, does not blow games out. And that my play style just doesn't really do that. I don't RCAD unless turn 1 you just go crazy and you're successful. This army is not blowing people up out of the water. Maybe unless you're Eldar. This army loves to fight Eldar. Maybe not Drukhari because there's so much haywire, but standard Eldar is. I wound everything in your army on like 2s and 3s almost across the board. So if I have access to it, I get to kill it.
If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40k. And if you're playing Warhammer, you know you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of dice.
So basically, from a strategy perspective, is you have the damage output to just murder whatever, and then the only challenge with Tau, and this is most shooting armies, is that there's a lot of terrain on the board. How do you apply your damage? And you basically put that ghost kill on the expansion objective, and your opponent has to do something about it. And then when they do, they're coming towards you. When they're playing Warhammer, like they score their secondary or do whatever, that's an opportunity for you to basically just like light their day up. And beyond that, you have things in reserve, I imagine, to try to complicate the game. Now they have to screen, and then also you're threatening all these different deep strike options, and it's kind of overwhelming. How does the reserves factor into this? What do you even put in reserve?
Yeah, so if you have, it depends on what the matchup is, but for something that has a lot of like heavy firepower, a good example is be like Double Dorn Guard. I'm probably just going to deploy both broadsides, because we're going to have this little like shoot off where I'm going to stand outside your 1-turn melter range, and I'm going to keep like shooting like broadsides at you, and odds are somebody's going to roll better, or we just kind of like boop each other because they're only AP1, AP2 on all of their long range shooting. Or a lot of times I'll strategic one unit broadsides, just because there's a lot of like the GW angles, they're long, right? And they'll span the whole table. There's a couple spots where I know that I can retaliate on like turn 2. A broadside unit can come out and blow a unit off an objective outside of 9. I usually deep strike my Enforcer squad. I'm sorry, not the Enforcers, but the Coldstar and the Sunforged. Just having that like fusion. Everyone fears the 3-inch deep strike from the Coldstars. Like I said, a lot of times that's not what I end up doing, especially because I have the internal grenade racks. If I have them on the table at the start of my movement phase, then I can like actually move and grenade over something. And having access to a bunch of like ablative mortals ahead of my shooting phase, instead of trying to like, if you've got like a tank at 2 wounds, I don't want to have to shoot it. I just want to drop it with like a movement grenade, and that's what I'll do. The star sides usually go in deep strike. They're such a good 3-inch deep strike unit, just because of the fact that they benefit from the +1 strength, +1 AP so well. And when they drop in, I drop them in like the middle of your army. And if you move anything, you're taking 66 flamer shots to the face on like an Overwatch.
It's like a crazy Overwatch threat there.
Yeah, the first couple times I used the like star size, I really didn't know what I was doing until I realized I was like, man, if I just 3-inch deep strike these guys, it's gonna hurt. And they've been amazing every game. Now they don't do that every game. If I know you're going to deploy your army up on the right line, I'm just going to deploy them and just have them move 10 and go flame stuff. And you want to jump on this objective? Cool, you're going to get torched on the way in. So you've got to grapple with the fact that you're going to take a bunch of damage on the way in.
So it sounds like a lot of this army and your process in getting better at it has been like trial by fire, just rep after rep after rep, like learning what to do in what specific situation. And is that you change your game plan from matchup to matchup? Is that like fair to say?
Yes. Yeah. That's
awesome.
That's 100% correct.
That's great. That's a lot of what we cover in part 2. So I'm really excited about it, because when you go to a tournament, you have such a wide variety of armies you're going to play against and experience and encounter. Like it could be anything. It's the Wild West out there. So that really tests your ability to adapt to the opponent. Has there been a matchup or something that you have found, or even a mission sometimes can be very difficult, like a scenario where that you don't want to experience with this Tau army, like it has an Achilles heel of sorts?
Knights of any flavor.
Really? Knights, I feel like, die to Tau firepowers. What's the deal there?
Well, that's what you'd think, the problem is that in the last like 6 games I have fought Knights, I have gone second. And every time my opponents have done the right thing, which is the most anxiety-inducing maneuver I can ever feel as a Tau player, is they have their entire damn army like 6 to 3 inches away from my deployment zone after going first and just advancing everything in my face. I can't deal with all of it at once. And every one of them seems to play with an Atropos, and Atropos hits me on twos, like literally like 1,700 points in my army or vehicles. So maybe I'm just unlucky, and Atroposes are really good in my like local meta and then like Arizona, because I fought one. My round 4 with Bill Barnes, he was playing Knights, and he's just like, well, I got first turn. I think I'm just going to run everything at you. And I'm inside. I'm like, no, please don't do that.
Oh, I hate when they do that. I know. But honestly, when you have like such a mobile shooty force, like playing KG is not going to help. Like you can get to them, right? Like you're playing Deep Strike 3-inch away Tau. Like there's no safe spot. You kind of do just have to blitz it. Are you just in general afraid if people just bum rush you?
It works with like heavy vehicle armies. Maybe not so much with like infantry. Without getting too into the weeds in round 6, my Blood Angel opponent did the same thing because he knows that he knew that drip feeding retaliation as Blood Angels just doesn't work.
Right.
Because I just, like I said, I just take those like marginal turns. Every turn I cut ahead by 4 to 5 points, and by turn 5, especially if I go second, he's out of units. And on a game like Linchpin, right, I'm gonna go score 18 to like 30 points on the last turn, and he goes, well, I'm just gonna bum rush you, and because he's all infantry. All my stuff, like I said, with Retaliation Cadre, everything gets better when you get closer to me. So I love that. You want to get aggressive? I can respond to it. I don't have to, but I can. I get more rules the closer you get to me. So being able to kind of like hit the gas when you need to is one of my favorite things about playing this army.
I love that. Yeah, it can totally change the tempo of the game, where the game is being played. Like you have all of the agency and decision making in a lot of these situations with your up and down and your 3-inch away deep strike, and just like the fact there's so many different threat angles for you to potentially attack. The only thing that we haven't really covered is like how you approach, I guess, contesting your opponent's primary and scoring your own secondaries and what that cadence is. Because there's other armies that can also hold their expansion objective and force you to come to them, and then they're also just kind of good at secondaries. In like that kind of locked game state, how do you break it open?
So that's where the 3-inch deep strike comes in. That's a great question, Nick. So my favorite thing to do is I have 3 CP, and I look my opponent in the eye and I say, you know what? It's real nice that you think you're going to hold your home objective this turn, but I'm just going to 3-inch deep strike, deploy, like kill the cultist unit on your silly objective, and then I'm going to move again, and I'm going to move on your objective, and there's nothing you can do about it. And being able to disrupt the gameplay with that, where all of a sudden, turn 3, they are looking at a very reliable, like, let's say on like a game like Scorched Earth, they're only scoring maybe 5 points. In the primary game on Scorched Earth is very much everybody scores 40 to 45. Being able to bring that down to like 30, 35 makes for a huge difference at the end of the game.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Then they got to go throw resources just to go hold their home objective, right? And I still got a CP to Overwatch. It's great. So the 3-inch deep strike and like the move again is exactly how I disrupt that game plan, because all they got to do is shoot. So I throw like maybe fusions down, maybe kill a tank. They're going to die, but I'm going to spend 1 CP to go throw 8 OC on an objective that probably doesn't have more than 5 OC on it. So being able to kind of like screw with that is a really big part of how this list functions.
So you're like aggressively using the move after shoot, the fire and fade ability you have to put people onto their objective. And like the people you're putting on there are crisis suits. Like they're painful to lose bodies, yes. Like they're expensive. But it's like a tempo kind of play where you're disrupting their primary, still holding yours, and you're dealing damage.
Yes. Yeah. So all of a sudden you're making like for 3 CP, I'm making a 5-point differential. And if the game is coming down to who's drawing better secondaries at that point, for every 5 points on primary I start docking you, if we're even on secondaries, right, we're redrawn whatever, and you're playing KG, I'm now disrupting that score by 5 points every turn. You now have to either come do the same thing to me, and then we actually start tussling in the middle, or I'm just going to start snowballing the game as soon as I can.
Right. No, I love that. So you're basically just like constantly contesting their primary, holding your primary. Secondary is just kind of happening in every round across the round. That's like a few more points added up to your score over time.
Yes. Yeah. So like I said, and because of that, this army is not like, if you take a look at my weekend scores, I had 3 pretty close games. And like kind of the other game, one of them was a pretty good blowout in round 2, but the other games were kind of just like incremental. I'm only winning by like 20 points, 10 to 20 points at a time. It's just
Right.
it's just not how my play style functions, and it's not how the list functions either.
Makes sense. So like in a team setting, are you more of like a play anything kind of person, maybe avoid knights apparently, but largely speaking, like just keep it close, or like do you have certain matchups where you push it open and like really bring home a lot of points?
So the matches that I do kind of push open, I don't think I'll ever get to play, even though I want to. RCAD devours, in my opinion, played correctly, Thousand Suns. I'm probably never going to get to play them, which is unfortunate. In like a team's environment, in a proper pairing, I'm probably never going to get to play them. They're never going to be an attacker.
Right.
But in my experience, I'm a very extremely reliable like 10-10 team environment list. Depending on who goes first, it really can play anything. I don't know what the actual stats are, but I would confidently say I've probably put about 70 to 80 reps in with this army. I've only ever had one game that was a blowout on my end, and that was because on TTS, I rolled the most 2s I think I've ever rolled in a game. And the sisters matchup that I knew was like super drawish, I ended up losing like 17-3. And I played that match like 10 times, and it comes down to 5 points every game. So I know that this army can 10-10 anything. It's just whether or not I want to push the gas and go for a bigger differential. If I see the opportunity, I'm going to take it. But I can very reliably be very defensive with this army too.
Awesome. Well, Jason, I'm really excited to get more in detail with how you play this army on the table. Obviously, it changes game to game, scenario to scenario, and that's really what we're going to cover. We're going to go through your actual games at the Smite Club Open over in part 2. So for subscribers, you can join on our Patreon, patreon.com/AOW40K. $5 a month gets you access to this episode, the rest of them, and our Discord server. And you can hear all about Jason's actual play-by-play moves and games from the Smite Club Open. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show. You've been an absolute pleasure to talk with.
Likewise, you're the man, Nick. Thanks for having me on, man.
Anytime, my friend. I will talk to you later. And listeners, join us in part 2, and we will see you next week.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. theartofwar40k.com.